The Legacy Superheroes Season 3, Episode 1, A Superhero's Revenge. With a gasp of pain, I fell from the sky and crashed into the street, hard enough to leave a small crater where I landed. Clutching my chest, my head spun, making it almost impossible for me to think clearly long enough to get up. I had never been hit that hard before, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if I would ever see well again. It didn't help that there was a loud buzzing sound in my ears that made it hard to hear anything. Nonetheless, I shook my head and looked up into the sky at the guy who had just sucker-punched me. He was one of the strangest enemies I'd faced yet, a fully grown adult man wearing green spandex, floating above me on long, eagle-like wings which extended from his back like my cape. He grinned down at me, revealing row after row of sharp, jagged teeth that made him look like an alligator about to chomp down on its prey. "Is this the best that the legendary trick shots got?" said the man in a loud, boisterous voice. He chuckled. "Ha ha ha, you certainly don't live up to all of the stories I've heard about you. Then again, you seem to be little more than a brat playing pretend, so maybe I shouldn't be surprised at your weakness." I gritted my teeth. "Sorry I'm not very entertaining, but I don't give refunds." The man chuckled. "Refunds? Why, I, the great Aeolus, do not need refunds. I shall finish you off and dominate this city, as I have done to countless other supers over the years. You may think yourself a superhero of great importance, but in truth, you are just a kid who is in way over his head." Rising to my feet slowly, I said, "It's hilarious to hear the great Aeolus lecture me about thinking I'm someone of great importance. Self-awareness clearly isn't one of your superpowers." Aeolus's eyes narrowed when I said that. "And I tire of your childish banter, boy. Time to teach you a lesson you'll never forget." Aeolus pointed a finger at me. A blast of wind rushed out from his fingertip, but I launched into the air at the last second, avoiding the wind blast that struck the crater I had been lying in. I arced in the air toward Aeolus, pulling back my fist to smash him in the face, but with a flap of his wings, Aeolus shot away to the left, avoiding my fist and forcing me to stop in midair to look for him. Aeolus landed on top of a nearby building and turned to face me with a mocking wave of his hand. "You'll have to be a bit faster than that to hit me, Trickshot. I, the great Aeolus, move as fast as the wind and hit as hard as the tornado." My hands balled into fists. Aeolus was a braggart, but he was the worst kind of braggart, the kind that could actually back up his bragging. I'd been fighting him for the last 10 minutes or so, ever since I came here to take him down, but Aeolus had thus far managed to avoid most of my blows. It was because he was ridiculously fast, able to use those great big wings of his to fly in nearly any direction like he weighed nothing. But he was no feather. He also had super strength, which he had displayed by punching me in the chest not too long ago. He wasn't as strong as me, from what I could tell, but he was definitely not the kind of bad guy you wanted to let your guard down around. I wasn't sure where Aeolus came from. He just appeared in southern Rumsfeld less than an hour ago, where he proclaimed that he was going to make Rumsfeld part of his dominion and that he would kill anyone who got in his way. From what I'd been able to gather from his ramblings, Aeolus was a former superhero from California who had gone rogue and now thought of himself as some kind of god king who was destined to rule America. He had bird-like wings, control over the wind, and super strength, which made him a triplet, that is, a superhero who got 3 powers from superpower, rather than one like most. Normally, I would have been glad to let Bugbite deal with him, but Bugbite was still recovering in his home from being shot last month, so I'd had to pick up his slack when it came to dealing with supervillains and criminals that the police couldn't handle. It seemed like Bugbite's absence had turned Rumsfeld into supervillain central, because Aeolus was the 3rd villain in as many weeks to pop up out of nowhere with delusions of grandeur. It also seemed like a lot of these guys wanted to fight me, like it was some kind of badge of honor. But in any case, I was more than happy to fight them if it meant they would leave innocent civilians alone. But it was annoying, as I found out during my fight with Aeolus. Aeolus might have been a blowhard, but there was a reason he wasn't rotting in jail somewhere yet, and it was because, despite his bragging, he had some skill and ability. Therefore, I couldn't let myself get complacent while fighting him, and I needed to end this fight quickly, partly because I wanted to have limited property damage, but also because I had a date, and it was one I couldn't be late for. The longer this fight went on, the more likely it became that my date, a girl named Deborah Ackerman from my school, would decide that I had blown her off and go home. It would be just my luck if I didn't get to go on my date because I got distracted with, fighting some supervillain freak who thought he was the king of air or whatever. You talk about being a tornado, but frankly, I think you're just a lot of hot air, I said. Maybe you should call yourself Hot Air Balloon instead of Aeolus, would be more appropriate, in my opinion. Aeolus's eyes narrowed again. You dare mock my greatness? But perhaps I should not be surprised. The weak often do not understand the power of their superiors until they are crushed underneath it. Aeolus waved his hands and a powerful gust of wind slammed into me, sending me tumbling through the air backwards. I tried to fight against the wind, but it was so strong that I couldn't make any headway. A particularly strong gust of wind sent me flying backwards until I crashed into and through the window of a nearby office building, smashing into a desk and sending papers and pens flying everywhere. A shriek of terror caused me to look up and see a woman in a business suit staring down at me with a mixture of shock and horror. Somehow, I had avoided crashing into her when I was knocked through the window, though I had completely destroyed her desk. Sorry about your desk, I said as I jumped to my feet. I glanced around at the desk's remains around me. I didn't mean to destroy it. The woman just stared at me with her mouth hanging open, but then she shook her head, screamed, and ran out of the room, shrieking about how a guy in blue and red spandex had just crashed into her office and destroyed her desk. It would have been kind of funny, but I had no time to think about it, so I just shot through the window again and flew toward Aeolus, who had not moved an inch from where he stood. Back again, said Aeolus. Very well, I can do this all day, though I'm not sure if you can do it all day. Aeolus raised his hand again, but I pulled a disc out of my pouch and hurled it at him. Aeolus ducked at the last second, however, allowing the disc to go flying over his head, and stood up again, saying, What was that? Are you just throwing random garbage at me now? You're getting desperate. I smirked. Why do you think I missed? The disc I'd thrown bounced off the wall behind him and struck Aeolus in the back of the head. It didn't knock him out, but he did stagger forward from the blow, so I zoomed forward and slammed my fist into his gut, making Aeolus gasp in pain. I followed up with an uppercut that sent him reeling, and then swept his legs out from underneath him with a kick. When Aeolus hit the ground, I got on his back and twisted both of his arms behind his back as painfully as I could without breaking them. Aeolus groaned, but I pinned him down in such a way that he would break his own arms if he tried to throw me off. Get off me, you child, Aeolus cried. I am your superior. Keep telling yourself that, bro, I said. Maybe someday it will become true. Until then, I suggest not moving too much because your arms feel awfully fragile under my grip, and it would be a real pity if I accidentally broke them both at once. Well, a pity for me, but probably a pain for you. Aeolus just grunted underneath me, but it was pretty clear that he wasn't going to risk trying to escape from me if it meant losing both of his arms. I couldn't help but smile to myself at the thought of how this big, bad supervillain, who liked to brag about how awesome he was, giving up because he was afraid of a little pain. What a wimp. Jack, said T.W. in my head suddenly, urgency in his voice. My sensors pick up a large force coming your way. I raised my head and looked around, but I saw nothing except the roofs of nearby buildings on every side. Large force? What are you talking about? I don't see... Abruptly, a foot came out of nowhere and kicked me in the face. The force of the blow was so unexpected that I let go of Aeolus and fell over the side of the roof and landed on top of a car on the street below. I landed on the car hard enough to crunch the roof underneath me, as well as set off the car's alarms, though thanks to my durability the fall mostly shook rather than hurt me. "What was that?" I said, raising and shaking my head. "That wasn't Aeolus, was it?" "No, I don't think so," said TW. "Whoever it was, they were too fast even for me to— Watch out." I looked up in time to see someone falling down toward me. I rolled backwards off the roof of the car instinctively and landed on the street in a crouch, just as the person who fell toward me landed on the car, though they landed more gracefully than me. Looking up at the newcomer, I didn't quite know what to make of him at first. He wore a full-body black and white costume, but it was strange. It appeared to be an entirely white suit, covered with black dots of various sizes, including a big black dot on the face of his costume. The black dot did not have any eye holes or mouth holes, which made me wonder how this guy could possibly see, or speak, or even breathe. He was muscular and athletic and carried what looked like a gun at his side. The black dots looked strangely organic, too, like they were stickers put on his body or something. "Who the hell are you?" I said, looking up at the new guy with confusion. "Friends with Aeolists?" The newcomer tilted his head to the side briefly, as if just as confused as me, before he said, "I'm not sure if you're stupid or just pretending to be stupid. You know who I am." "Actually, I don't," I said, shaking my head as I rose to my feet. Mind introducing yourself for me? That would be kind of nice." "Toby Holes," said the newcomer. He pointed a finger at me. "And I am going to get the revenge I have been denied for all of these years." Before I could ask him what he meant, Holes snapped his fingers, and without warning, a hole materialized underneath me, and I fell to my doom. I fell into a deep, empty, inky blackness, and for a moment could not see where I was. But I could tell I was falling down, but to where? I couldn't say. All I could tell was that I was falling into endless darkness, feeling the wind rush by me as I plumed through shadow. Then, without warning, a light shone below me, and I dropped out of the darkness and into the light. It took me a second to realize that I was back in Rumsfeld, only now I was about a mile above the city, falling to my doom. But it didn't matter. I could still fly, after all. I tried to activate my flight powers so I could make a safe landing, but oddly, I did not feel the usual sensation of power that flowed through me whenever I used my flight power. It was like I had somehow lost my powers, even though I still wore the trickshot costume and the trickshot watch. "TW," I said in my head as I fell. "What's wrong with my suit? Why can't I fly?" "I'm not sure," said TW. "I think something in that hole might have interfered with the suits." DW's voice suddenly shattered, turning into a loud, irritating buzzing noise like radio static. It was deafening in my mind, briefly making me forget that I was falling to my doom. "TW," I shouted in my head. "TW, are you there? TW?" Unfortunately, all I heard was the strange static that had interrupted his voice. And, even worse, the pavement was drawing closer and closer, and to the point where I was sure I was going to become little more than smashed meat once I hit the pavement. I desperately tried to access my powers again and again, but I couldn't feel them whatsoever. It didn't help that the static in my head was getting louder and louder with each passing second, to the point where I could barely even hear my own thoughts. I had no idea what happened to TW or my suit, but I knew that if I didn't do something soon, my life and my superhero career were about to end. Just as I passed the roof of the tallest building, power flooded my limbs, and my powers activated again. I activated my flight powers at the last possible second, skirting over the pavement and shooting back up into the sky, before I went back down and landed on the street next to a lamppost, which I leaned against for support. Adrenaline flooded my entire being, making my heart race as I panted and tried to catch my breath. Said Holes, who was still standing on top of the car where I had left him before. What a disappointment. I thought for sure that you were going to land headfirst onto the street and die. I forgot about your flight powers. Guess I'll just have to kill you myself. Holes jumped off the car and strode toward me without any fear in his step. Not that I could blame him. Whatever his powers were, they were unlike anything else I had faced before. Even Aeolus, despite his strength, was not as tricky as this guy. "Who are you?" I said. I still heard the static instead of TW in my head, though it was a lot quieter now. "And why did you try to kill me?" "I already told you," said Holes simply. "I'm Holes. What more do you need to know than that?" Pushing myself off the lamppost, I said, "A lot, actually, but that's fine for now. Once I take you down and hand you over to the police, I'll find out all about you when they publish the details of their interrogation in the Rumsfeld Journal." I rushed toward Holes without hesitation and threw a punch at his chest. My fist successfully connected, but instead of slamming into his chest, my fist actually went into the black hole on his body and came out of the hole in his face. My own fist punched me in the face, sending me staggering backwards from the blow. I had never punched myself before, and now wondered how anyone had managed to withstand a solid blow from me. My whole world spun around me, making it nearly impossible for me to focus on anything. Shaking my head, I looked at Holes, who had stopped and had folded his arms again, tapping his foot impatiently. "What was that?" I said, blinking my eyes rapidly. How did you make me punch myself?" "You mean you seriously didn't know that would happen?" said Holes in genuine astonishment. "Amazing! Perhaps you really aren't the same trick shot I once knew," he shrugged. "Not that it matters. Whether you're the original trick shot or some kid wearing his clothes, I'm going to get my revenge, no matter what." Holes held out his hands. Another hole opened up underneath me, but I flew into the sky at the last second, hovering several feet above the pitch-black hole on the street below me. Looking into the hole, I realized that I couldn't see the bottom of it, and that it also looked exactly like the holes which dotted Holes's body. "Let me guess," I said, looking at Holes again. "You can create holes that allow you to bend the space-time continuum and break physics like a criminal breaks the law, right?" "You figured that out quickly," said Holes. "Unfortunately, knowing even that much won't help you stop me." A hole opened up underneath Holes, who fell into it out of my sight quickly. "Ha," I said, looking around in confusion. "Where did you go?" All of a sudden, through the static in my head, I heard TW say, "Look out behind you." I looked over my shoulder to see a black hole, identical to the one that Holes had just fallen through, appear on the building behind me. Without warning, Holes leapt through it and kicked me in the jaw with feet as strong as steel. I immediately crashed down to the street below again, hitting the pavement hard enough to crack it. My body aching all over, I pushed myself up and looked around again, but Holes had once more disappeared. "Hey, where are you?" I called out, rising to my feet slowly due to how much pain I was currently in. "Show yourself, you coward." A deep chuckle came from above, and I looked up to see Holes standing on top of a nearby truck trailer. Though I couldn't see his face, it was clear to me that he was extremely amused by my inability to fight back against him effectively. "I'm no coward," said Holes. "I simply know how to use my powers to their limit. Nothing cowardly about that. Though you can keep crying about it if it makes you feel better for being such a loser." I was so angry I didn't even say anything. I just drew 3 silver discs from my pouch and threw all 3 of them in different directions. The discs bounced off the streets, buildings, cars, and everything else, moving so fast that even I had a hard time following their trajectory. But I knew that if I could barely follow them, then Holes likely couldn't see them at all. Soon, the discs bounced one last time off different surfaces and went straight toward Holes, but to my astonishment, The 3 discs entered 3 different holes in his body and emerged from 3 other holes. One of the rogue discs even came back at me, but I jumped out of the way before it could hit me. "You still haven't figured out that you can't hit me unless I want you to?" said Holes. "Truly, you must indeed be a different trick shot, because the original trick shot was well acquainted with the limits and abilities of my powers. You, on the other hand, are so ignorant that it would be hilarious if it wasn't so depressing." "I've never fought you before," I said. "How can I know the limits of your powers if this is the first time I've met you?" "Easy," said Holes. "You can't." Holes suddenly fell through the hole on top of the trailer and disappeared from sight again. I whipped my head this way and that, looking for him, but Holes did not appear to be anywhere. He seemed to have vanished into thin air, though knowing his general strategy, it was clear to me that he was probably going to pop out of a hole and strike me when I least expected it. "Jack," said TW in my head suddenly, his voice slightly buzzing. "Are you there?" "TW," I said aloud, not caring if anyone overheard me. I kept looking for Hole. "Where have you been, buddy? I've just been getting static this whole time." "My apologies," said TW in a shaky voice. I'm not sure, but I seem to be experiencing some sort of technical issue." It was hard to understand what TW was saying due to the static occasionally overlapping his words, but I said, "We'll figure it out later. Right now, I'm fighting some guy who can make holes everywhere and—" "Holes?" TW interrupted. "Do you mean the supervillain?" "Yeah," I said. "You heard of him?" "Heard of him?" said TW. "I fought him with Gregory years ago. He's supposed to be in jail." "What's he doing?" "Well, not in jail," I said in annoyance. "I don't know," said TW. "But you should beat him anyway. His powers are tricky to deal with, but the trick to taking him out is—" Something hard slammed into the back of my head, temporarily diverting my attention away from TW. I staggered forward from the blow, stars flashing in my eyes, but managed to turn around in time to see Holes disappear into another hole before I could stop him. "Get back here," I shouted, running over to the spot where Holes had been standing. "Stop running like a girl and fight." "It's not going to work," said TW. "Holes doesn't care about honor. He just cares about winning, which is why he need to listen to me and take my advice before he strikes again." "Shoot, man," I said, once again looking around to find him. "I'm all ears." "Very well," said TW. "Hull's main weakness is—" Abruptly, TW's voice was replaced by more irritating static, only this time it was even louder than before. "TW," I said. "W, are you there? TW, hello." Unfortunately, it seemed like I had lost my connection to TW again, and just when he was about to tell me how to beat this guy, too. Just my luck. But I had no time to whine about that. Right now, I needed to focus on figuring out where the heck Holes was going to pop up again next, and what his weakness was. Before I could do that, however, I was kicked in the back, the blow sending me staggering forward again. But I turned around and grabbed Holes's arm just before he could disappear into another hole. "Gotcha," I said, tightening my grip on his forearm, a wolfish smile on my face. "Can't get out of this, now can you?" Holes, however, just pulled his gun out of his pocket and pointed at me. He pulled the trigger, and some kind of dart shot out of the gun and into my shoulder. Gasping in surprise, I accidentally let go of Holes, who quickly disappeared into yet another hole, but I didn't pay him any attention. I grabbed the dart and ripped it from my shoulder, grunting under my breath after the brief surge of pain followed the removal of the dart. "Damn it," I said, clutching the hole in my shoulder where the dart had once been. "What was that all about?" Suddenly I began to feel tired and sluggish. I leaned against the lamppost again, doing my best to fight my drowsiness, but it was a losing battle. I didn't feel like I was going to fall asleep exactly, but I felt as though all of the strength had been sapped from my body, making it very hard to move. "Jack," said DW, his voice breaking through the static again. "Holes injected some kind of sedative into your muscles. It won't knock you out, but it will make your muscles relax." "Yeah, I could tell. I said, doing my best not to let my relaxed knees let out underneath me. "Tell me something I don't know, like Hole's weakness." "Right," said TW. "Hall's weakness is—" Static once again interrupted TW's sentence. "Dang it," I screamed. "This isn't funny anymore." I quickly shut my mouth, however, and tried to calm down. Getting angry would not solve anything. I needed to remain calm and rational in order to stop Holes. At this point, it was pretty clear that I was on my own insofar as I needed to defeat Holes. I couldn't rely on TW to help me, given whatever his technical issues were. But how? Hole's power was unpredictable. He could appear seemingly anywhere at any time for any reason he wanted. There was no rhyme or reason to his tactics, other than he liked to sneak up on me, but that was not very helpful information. I guess I also knew that he had a gun with some kind of sedative-laden darts in it, but that would have been useful to know before he shot me the first time. Thinking fast, it occurred to me that Holes could apparently only open 2 holes at one time, one for him to enter, the other for him to exit, not counting the ones on his body. Maybe if I could force him to use up his 2 holes trying to redirect one of my attacks, I would be able to get a good hit on him. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was the only one I had. Pushing myself off the lamppost again, I shouted, "Hey, Holes! Your glorified game of whack-a-mole isn't fun anymore. Think I'm going to go home now and find something more fun to do, like telling my friends how lame you are?" "Lame?" said Holes behind me. "You haven't hit me even once, you little brat, and you see fit to talk to me about—" I whirled around and punched Holes in the chest. As I expected, my fist went into his chest and came out of his face, but I ducked my own punch and slammed my other fist into the white space between 2 of the holes on his body. Holes cried out in pain and staggered to the side, causing my arm to pop out of his chest. He clutched the spot where I'd punched him tenderly, but I wasn't about to give him a chance to get away. I threw another punch at him, striking him in the other side of his body. He nearly fell this time, but instead just backed away, up against a nearby car, his breathing heavier than before. "You may not be the original trick shot, but you certainly hit as hard as he did," said Holes, his voice slightly strained as he clutched his stomach. "Maybe even harder." I slammed my fist into my other hand. "Definitely harder, though mostly because you pissed me off, and I'm not in a particularly forgiving mood today." I ran toward Holes again, about to deal the final blow, but I only got a few steps toward Holes before a hole suddenly appeared on the car behind him and he fell into it backwards. I rushed over to go after him, but by the time I reached the car, Holes had vanished again. "Holes!" I shouted, rotating on the spot to look for him. "Holes! Show yourself! I know you're still around here. Stop this stupid game of hide-and-seek and fight me like a man." But no matter how loud I shouted, Holes did not reappear. I looked in every direction, but as far as I could tell, Holes had finally retreated. "He seems to have run away, Jack," said TW in my head again. "I can't sense him anywhere. Perhaps he's, licking his wounds?" "Like the coward he is," I said with disgust. "Actually, this is typical of him," said TW. "Holes always knew when to give up. Presumably, you turned out to be harder than expected." "So what?" I said. "He got away. I had him on the ropes, but he escaped anyway." "Ah, at least you got Iolus," said TW. "He hasn't escaped, as far as I—" A loud laugh from above made me look up. Aeolus flew past overhead suddenly, a powerful gust of wind following him. The wind knocked me down on my butt, and by the time I got back up to my feet, Aeolus was long gone, leaving me standing all alone in the now empty streets of Rumsfeld. I thought about taking off after him, but decided against it because I was too sore and too depressed to think about going after him right now. Well, what were you saying about Aeolus not escaping TW? AI said, frowning. And never mind, said TW. Look at these shoes. I looked down at my feet, though I actually wasn't wearing any shoes because my full body costume went down to my feet, though the feet of my costume were padded underneath to keep my feet safe. What shoes? My apologies, Jack, said TW, his voice back to normal all of a sudden. Seems like I somehow picked up a radio signal, a commercial of some sort from a nearby radio, now available at your favorite retailer. Better get them now before they sell out. TW, I think you should go quiet for a while, I said, getting seriously concerned about you, buddy. Let's get back to base and talk there. You need to tell me more about this Holes guy and his past with grandfather, okay? Okay, Ja. Call now to receive an exclusive training DVD today. I wasn't sure what was more disturbing, that TW was trying to sell me training DVDs, or that there was clearly something wrong with his programming. The latter was probably more disturbing, but either way, I still realized that things were about to get a whole lot more complicated for me. My base, if you could call it that, was a small bungalow located well out in the country outside of the Rumsfeld city limits. It had originally been owned by a lady named Margaret Rumsfeld, a descendant of the original Harold Rumsfeld, who founded the city over 150 years ago. But when she passed away last month and it fell into the hands of her granddaughter Ashley, Ashley had allowed me to use it as a base of operations for my superhero career. I'd taken to calling my base Target Practice 2, because there was also a makeshift range behind the house which I could use to practice my skills, in particular my aiming skills. Landing on the other side of the gate, I was immediately greeted by loud barking from Sammy, Ashley St. Bernard, who ran out from behind the house and tackled me to the ground before I could do anything. Instead of ripping my face off with his teeth, however, Sammy just licked me happily, which was a big departure from how he had treated me the first time I came here. But as I found out since moving here, Sammy was a big softy and easily made friends, especially if those friends had treats. "Okay, Sammy, okay," I said, pushing the big dog off me. "Nice to see you too, but right now I need to get into the house. We can play catch later, all right?" Sammy barked a couple more times, this time more happily than before, and followed me back to the house. He sat down on his bed next to the door while I unlocked the door and entered, closing the door behind me and turning on the main lights at the same time. As soon as I closed the door, TW materialized before me in his blue hologram form, only he didn't look nearly as stable as before. His holographic body kept flickering on and off. Its transparency was lighter than normal, and he looked like he was about to simply blink out of existence entirely. And his face, which normally resembled grandfather's face, would occasionally be replaced by a blank blue screen, which was every bit as creepy and disturbing as you'd expect. "Tito?" I said worryingly, looking at him with concern. "Are you okay? You look like you're glitching out." TW's form suddenly stabilized, though based on his expression, he seemed to be holding himself together through sheer willpower alone. "Sorry, I am not quite sure what just happened, other than I appear to be experiencing some kind of glitch. It disturbs me as much as it does you, by the way, perhaps even more so because of the implications behind it." "Implications?" I said. "What do you mean?" TW folded his hands behind his back. "Do you recall how, when we first met, I told you that I didn't have much time left, and that, unless the trick shot watch was repaired, I would cease working entirely at some point?" "Oh, yeah," I said, nodding. "I remember. You said it was because you were old." "Right," said TW, nodding. "I thought I had more time than I did, but it appears that my degeneration is accelerating. I believe that it may be partially due to Hole's powers. though I'm not sure how, given how your grandfather had to deal with Hole's powers many times before, and yet they never affected me negatively." "I see," I said. "Is there anything we can do about it? Anything at all?" TW shrugged. "You would need to find someone who can repair the watch, but there aren't very many people like that due to the watch's unique nature. Your grandfather developed me himself so he could fix me, but I'm not sure anyone else could." I bit my lower lip. "Huh! And grandfather, of course, is still imprisoned on Icon's Island base, which is why we need to go there as quickly as we can, not that we need more reasons to hurry, of course." "Exactly," said TW. "I've been trying to make contact with people on the coast of Texas who could take us to the island base, but I haven't received any replies yet, not even from Gregory's old friends, but I'm still trying, so don't worry about that." I nodded, but TW and I both knew that that wasn't the main reason I hadn't left for Icon's base yet, was because of my parents. I was still just a teenager who lived with his parents. Yes, school might have been out for the summer and I might have had a lot of free time because I didn't have a summer job or anything like that, but that didn't mean I had the freedom to just up and go to the Gulf of Mexico for my final showdown with Icon without telling anyone. My parents would wonder where I was, maybe even outright panic. Considering how they reacted the last time I disappeared without telling them where I was, I didn't want to know what they would do if I disappeared for a week or longer. The best way to avoid panicking my parents about this would be to tell them that I was trickshot and that I was going to save grandfather, but that would be difficult, mostly because I didn't know how they would respond. They both seemed to like trickshot okay, but if they knew that their one and only son had secretly been practicing superheroism for the last couple of months without their knowledge, I didn't think they would take it very well. They especially wouldn't take it well, I thought, if they knew that I was going to break into the base of a powerful, secretive organization that had already displayed a willingness to kill, especially one that had already taken one of their sons from them previously. I had to save grandfather. Yeah, I knew where he was now thanks to the coordinates given to me by my Uncle Josh last month. At this point, it was only a matter of time before I went to Icon's Island base and rescued him. Yet I needed to figure out an excuse I could use to leave town without raising any alarms. And I needed to do it before school started up too, because once school started back up, I would have very little time to head down to Icon's base and save grandfather. But I pushed such thoughts out of my mind for now in order to focus on TW. Well, I hope you hear back from someone soon. The longer we wait, the more likely it is that Icon will do all sorts of horrible things to grandfather. I know, said TW, but I think we have a more urgent problem at the moment. Namely, holes. Oh, right, I said, nodding. What is that guy's story? You said he was an old enemy of grandfather's and he was supposed to be in jail, but you didn't elaborate on what you meant by all of that. TW held out a hand and a small hologram appeared in his palm, a hologram of Holes, which began to slowly rotate on the spot in order to give me a good look of his general appearance. Holes, like most supervillains, was a former superhero who went rogue, his real name being Arthur Renner. In his case, he was a superhero of Oklahoma, but went rogue after an investigation discovered that he was paying off criminals in order to make himself look better. He fled to Texas, where he started his criminal career by trying to rob a bank in Rumsfeld, which is how he ran into Gregory. Did grandfather beat him? I said. Yes, said TW. Unfortunately, Hole's powers make it hard to keep him locked away in prison for long, so every time Gregory beat him, he would just use his powers to escape prison and resume his criminal career. He clashed with other superheroes over the years, but Gregory was the one he clashed with most often and the one he hated more than the others due to how persistently Gregory opposed his efforts. If he can just use his powers to escape prison whenever he wants, why were you surprised to find out that he wasn't in jail? I said. Because the last time I saw him, his powers had been negated, said TW. 10 years ago, right before Gregory was kidnapped by Icon, he fought Holes one last time on the outskirts of Rumsfeld. The fight ended with Gregory winning, but the results of the battle were different from all the others. Gregory managed to negate Holes' powers once and for all, leaving Holes an ordinary human who could be placed in an ordinary prison without any chance of escape. "How did Grandfather do that?" I said. "Aren't superpowers genetic? I mean, after you've been injected with the superpower drug, of course." "They are," TW agreed. "And for the longest time, it was thought to be impossible to negate or remove superpowers from an individual who had been injected with the superpower drug. But Gregory, working together with a scientist friend of his, came up with a formula that could outright remove an individual's superpowers from their body if injected into the bloodstream." "Really?" I said. "What was the formula called?" "D-Power," said TW. "It is essentially an antidote to the superpower drug. By injecting it into a superhuman's bloodstream, D-Power essentially cleanses a person's body of their powers. It was an experimental drug at the time with no guarantee it would work, but Gregory was desperate to deal with Holes once and for all, so he volunteered to field test its abilities on Holes." "And I presumed it worked then," I said. "Right?" "Right," said TW, nodding. "It worked flawlessly. It left Holes unable to use his powers. They even did DNA tests and found that there were no traces of superpower in his body at all. It was truly miraculous, especially once you consider how this was the first time the drug was even tested." "Is this D-Power stuff still around?" I said. "If so, why haven't I heard about it until now?" "Because the government has kept a tight lid on its existence," said TW, "and it has rarely been used, even though it is effective at what it does. The government does not want D-Power to end up in the hands of criminals who would use it to depower superheroes. Imagine what would happen if a supervillain like, say, Aeolus got his hands on D-Power. You wouldn't want the only people with superpowers to be villains and criminals, would you?" I shuddered at the thought. No, I definitely wouldn't. But if it was used on Holes and it worked, then how did Holes get his powers back? "Huh? That is a question I don't have the answer to," said TW. "Perhaps D-Power's effect has finally worn off and his powers returned. As I said, D-Power was an experimental drug, and no one knew what its long-term effects might be on an individual, especially because Holes was literally the first person to have the drug tested on them." "Said he broke out of jail, didn't he?" I said. "Are there any news reports on that?" TW paused, which he usually did whenever he was searching the internet, and finally said, oddly enough, "No. The most recent articles about Holes that I could find were written about 10 years ago when Holes was put in jail. There aren't any recent articles about him breaking out of prison." "Weird," I said. "I'd think there'd be at least one news report on the escape of a dangerous supervillain from prison, especially one who had lost his powers. Wonder what's up?" "I'm not sure," said TW, "but perhaps he broke out so recently that even the local news hasn't reported on it yet. In any case, Hole's presence is incredibly troubling, especially knowing that he wants revenge against you because of what your grandfather did to him years ago." "I know," I said, my shoulders slumped. "And as long as he's in Rumsfeld, there's no way I'm leaving to go to Icon's base. Oh, and I can't forget Aeolus, too. Now, there are 2 supervillains running around Rumsfeld. Supervillains I can't just leave alone or forget about." "Right," said TW. "If it helps, Gregory faced a situation similar to yours once where he had to deal with 2 separate supervillains wreaking havoc in Rumsfeld. He solved the issue by calling in help from a fellow superhero of his in a neighboring city." "Which I can't do because I'm an illegal superhero, remember?" I said. "If I tried that, I would just get arrested. Man, I wish Bugbite was out of the hospital, because I'm sure he would be working hard every day to bring in Holes and Aeolus." "Indeed," said TW. But until he gets out of the hospital, you're the only person in the city who can actually deal with these two." "Yeah," I said, "but still—" Bright. I was interrupted by a sudden beeping sound from my pocket. Pulling my phone out of my pocket, I glanced at the screen and nearly jumped into the air when I saw who the text was from. "Crud," I said. I looked at TW. "I gotta go." "Go?" said TW. "Go where?" "To my date," I said, turning around and walking back toward the door. "My date with Deborah Ackerman, which I can't be late for because if I am, I doubt she'll go out with me ever again." The end of the Legacy Superheroes Season 3, Episode 1, A Superhero's Revenge.